Hey guys, tonight we're heading out to the dusty farmlands of Shaanxi Province, China, where the air is dry enough to chap your lips before you finish your first sentence, and the ground crunches under your shoes like stale crackers. Picture this, you're out here early in the morning, sweat already forming at the back of your neck, holding nothing more glamorous than a wooden shovel. You're not a famous archaeologist or a wealthy explorer, you're just a tired farmer trying to dig a well so your crops don't give up on life this season. Then, clunk. Your shovel hits something solid. Not the usual rock, not the usual root. Something hollow, like smacking a clay pot. And, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, because if you keep digging, you're about to disturb the resting place of thousands of soldiers who have been waiting underground for over 2,000 years. You might just wake the dead, or at least their ceramic cousins. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're watching. I love seeing just how global this little bedtime club has become. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ground is stubborn today, each scoop heavy, each strike of the shovel sending little puffs of ochre dust into the already hazy air. You pause, squinting at the dent you just made. Something curved peeks out, smooth under the dirt, strangely symmetrical, definitely not a random rock. You kneel down, scraping with your fingers, smearing mud across your palms. The piece is reddish-brown and rings faintly when you tap it. At first you think it's just an old jar. People have been farming this land for generations, who knows what's buried down here. But then, after another strike, a chunk breaks loose, and you hold it up to the light. It looks like a piece of a nose. Wide, flared, unmistakably human. Only it's too perfect, too stiff. Clay, not bone. You laugh nervously, either you just ruined someone's ancient art project, or you're standing on top of a graveyard that is way above your pay grade. Mainstream history tells us that this exact scene really happened in 1974, when a man named Yang Jifa and a few fellow villagers were digging a well near their melon field. They had no idea they were about to stumble on one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. But there's a fringe tidbit that floats around in local gossip, that before he even found the clay, Yang had a strange dream about soldiers marching under the ground. Whether that was premonition or just the byproduct of too much rice wine, historians still argue whether that detail was invented later to make the story sound spookier. You sit back on your heels, heart thudding a little faster now. Part of you wants to just cover it back up and pretend you saw nothing, classic horror movie survival instinct. But curiosity wins. You motion for your brother to come over. Soon, you're both crouched over the hole, prying out more fragments, a hand here, part of an ear there, the edge of what looks suspiciously like armor. The pile of broken clay grows, and with it, your anxiety. The sun climbs higher, your shirts stick to your backs, and the field seems to buzz with a kind of expectant silence, like the earth itself is holding its breath. When the rest of the villagers wander over, drawn by your shouts, they aren't thrilled. Some shake their heads, muttering about bad luck, ancient curses, and how you've just invited trouble on everyone's heads. One elderly neighbor insists you should rebury it all immediately before, whatever is down there, gets angry. Another jokes that maybe you found treasure, though he says it with the kind of half-serious grin that means he'll be back after dark to dig on his own if you don't. By now, your neat little well is a mess. The sides are collapsing, and the pit is littered with broken pottery, twisted bits that clearly once formed something life-sized. You can't shake the feeling that there's more under there, something big. Whatever this is, it isn't just one statue, and it isn't just one jar. It feels organized. As you lean on your shovel, sweat dripping into your eyes, you have that weird tingle down your spine, the one you get when you realize you've just stepped onto a road that has no turning back. The pit yawns up at you like a secret you weren't supposed to hear, and you know, with a kind of quiet certainty, that tomorrow you won't be farming melons. Tomorrow you'll still be digging, only now you'll be trying to figure out just how deep this mystery goes. Word spreads faster than wildfire in a dry wheat field, and by dawn the next morning, half the village seems to have shown up to gawk at the hole. You're there too, bleary-eyed but jittery with curiosity, watching as people poke at the clay shards you pulled out yesterday. Some of the pieces are laid out on a mat now, and when put together, they almost form half of a human face, flat nose, stern mouth, a sliver of a warrior's top-knot hairstyle. The village chatter is a chaotic mix. One woman claims the statues must be the guardians of some ancient treasure and warns everyone not to take anything home unless they want a haunting. Someone else mutters that they might be cursed idols left behind by an angry god, which earns an eye roll from the younger men, who are already debating how much the local scrap merchant might pay for so much free clay. You stand off to the side, hands on your hips, feeling torn. You're not an archaeologist, but something about these fragments feels bigger than just some old pots. Mainstream history backs you up here. When Yang Jifa and his neighbors dug up those first warrior fragments, most of the villagers didn't think they'd found a historic site, they thought they'd found good building material. Some of the earliest pieces were apparently sold off as curios or even ground up for fertilizer before anyone realized what they were. That detail sounds absurd now, but remember, in 1974, there was no internet, no museum nearby to call. This was just farm country. You try to keep things organized, which is like trying to herd cats. People are climbing into the pit now, hacking at the sides with picks and shovels, pulling out more broken pieces and stacking them on the ground. One guy finds what looks like a clay hand still holding the hilt of a sword, though the sword itself has long rotted away. Another yells out that he's uncovered a whole foot, still standing upright like it's ready to march. The strangest thing, though, is the smell. It's faint, earthy, but with a metallic tang, like wet rust. One old man swears he can smell old blood. Whether that's real or just the power of suggestion, historians still argue whether the site once contained real weapons and organic material that might have left traces in the soil. As the day wears on, you notice that the mood has shifted. At first, everyone was laughing and joking, but now they're quieter, more serious. Every new fragment seems to suggest that what you found is enormous. There's talk of calling in the county officials. Nobody really trusts government involvement. What if they just seize the land and leave you with nothing? But the pit is getting too big to manage on your own, and frankly, it's starting to freak people out. You sit with your brother under a scraggly tree for lunch, chewing hard bread while staring at the hole. The wind whistles through the wheat, carrying with it the sound of a distant train and the faint clink of someone still digging despite the break. You can't shake the sense that you're sitting on top of something organized, something deliberate. Soldiers don't bury themselves in neat rows, after all. Someone made this. Someone planned for you, or someone, someday, to find it. By evening, after yet another piece that looks suspiciously like a full torso is uncovered, you've had enough. You grab your bicycle and rattle down the dusty road toward the township office, heart hammering. The sun is setting behind you, turning the sky blood orange and making the wheat glow. You tell yourself you're just going to report it, just so it's on record. But in the back of your mind, there's that prickling thought, once you tell the authorities, this stops being your discovery. It becomes theirs. Still, you knock on the office door, bow slightly as the clerk opens it, and launch into a breathless explanation about faces in the dirt and fields full of clay men. The clerk raises an eyebrow, clearly thinking you've been in the sun too long, but eventually writes down the details and promises to send someone to take a look. That night, lying on your thin mat, you have trouble sleeping. Every time you close your eyes, you see that cracked clay face staring up at you from the dirt, as if it's trying to tell you something. You turn over, pull the blanket up over your head, and try not to imagine a whole army of them standing silently under your field, just waiting. The next morning, you wake to the sound of truck engines growling down the dirt road, unusual enough in this sleepy village to make everyone drop what they're doing and run outside. A small convoy pulls up, 2 rattling jeeps and 1 boxy government truck with faded characters stenciled on the side. Out step a handful of officials in stiff, buttoned shirts and dusty shoes, carrying clipboards and looking both curious and slightly annoyed, like you've just made their paperwork pile taller. They gather around the pit, shielding their eyes against the rising sun. One of them hops down into the hole, crouches, and carefully picks up a clay shard between thumb and forefinger. He examines it, taps it against his clipboard, then climbs out again and starts writing notes. You can't read his expression, half impressed, half irritated that he had to drive all the way out here for this. "Where exactly did you find the face?" one asks. You show him, and he nods, motioning for two of his colleagues to start measuring the site with tape. The villagers hang back, murmuring. Some are worried that this means they'll lose their land. Others seem proud, already speculating that maybe this will bring good fortune or even tourists. The officials work methodically, jotting down soil depths, marking spots with red flags, sketching quick diagrams. At one point, one of them asks if anyone has taken any pieces home. You feel your ears burn because, yes, you might have tucked a small fragment under your bed just to show your kids. When you admit this, he tells you to bring it to the truck immediately. He says it like a request, but the way he stands makes it clear it's not optional. Mainstream history notes that after Yang Jifa reported his find, county officials quickly arrived on site, took possession of the fragments, and sent word to provincial authorities in Xi'an. Within weeks, a team of professional archaeologists was dispatched. But here's a quirky tidbit: according to some village gossip, the first county officer who inspected the site accidentally broke one of the warrior fragments when he tried to lift it out of the pit. Historians still argue whether that actually happened or if it's just a story locals tell to poke fun at bureaucrats with soft hands. By noon, the government team decides the site is significant enough to secure. They post 2 guards at the edge of the field, young men with rifles who look as bored as they are sunburned, and warn the villagers not to dig any further. This sets off a new round of whispers. Some are convinced this means treasure, others mutter that it's a burial ground and the guards are there to keep the dead from walking out. You watch as they load the fragments into wooden crates, padding them with straw. Each piece seems to take on new importance as it disappears into the back of the truck, like you're handing over not just clay but part of your village's story. After they leave, the field feels oddly quiet, almost abandoned. The pit sits there, gaping, its edges beginning to crumble. The guards smoke lazily nearby, occasionally shooing away children who get too close. You can't help feeling a strange mixture of pride and loss. Pride, because maybe you've just uncovered something monumental. Loss, because now it's out of your hands. That evening, a group of neighbors gathers outside your home to discuss what just happened. Some are worried that the government will take the entire field without compensation. Others think this could be good for everyone, that maybe you'll get rewarded, maybe the village will get a new road or a school out of it. As you sit listening, the sky goes dark and the stars start to prick through, bright against the rural blackness. A cool breeze stirs, carrying the smell of the freshly turned earth. You wonder what lies beneath those stars, under that field, just how many of those clay figures are still down there, staring up at the surface. Before bed, you sneak one more look at the pit. The moonlight catches on something you hadn't noticed before, the faint curve of another shoulder, half buried, pointing toward the north as if in formation. You shiver. Tomorrow, more people will come, and this quiet little village will never be the same again. The next morning, you hear the trucks before you see them, this time, not just county officials but a small army of experts. They climb out wearing khaki jackets, sun hats, and carrying an arsenal of tools you've never seen before: brushes, trowels, cameras, clipboards, and what looks like measuring sticks as tall as a man. These are the archaeologists from Xi'an, and from the way they fan out across your field, you can tell they mean business. They don't just poke around like yesterday's officials. They set up a perimeter with rope and wooden stakes, assign sectors to each worker, and begin gently brushing the soil like they're giving the earth a spa treatment. You and the other farmers watch from a respectful distance, equal parts fascinated and frustrated. You want to dig too, but you've been firmly told to stay behind the rope. One young archaeologist, barely older than your nephew, explains that this is a controlled excavation. We need to understand the context, he says, as if that clears up everything. You nod politely, though you're mostly focused on the slow, mesmerizing way he's uncovering something that looks like a full clay chest plate. Bit by bit, the shape of a warrior's torso emerges, the armor plates sculpted so carefully that you can almost hear them clink if you listen hard enough. By midday, several more partial figures have been revealed. It's eerie, heads, arms, and torsos lying at odd angles where centuries of soil collapse have scattered them. At one point, a team uncovers a perfectly intact warrior head, eyes stern, mustache carefully carved. The archaeologists cheer softly, and you find yourself grinning like you've just met someone famous. Mainstream history confirms that the first archaeologists to reach the site in 1974 realized almost immediately that this was not a random burial but something much larger and more deliberate. They started formal excavation within days, eventually revealing that the statues were arranged in rows, like soldiers on parade. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. One of the earliest archaeologists reportedly slept on-site in a makeshift tent so he could watch over the dig at night. Historians still argue whether that was devotion to science or just fear that locals might sneak back in to borrow pieces. The dig has an oddly hypnotic rhythm: scrape, brush, sweep, photograph, repeat. Every time a new fragment comes up, someone logs its exact position, number, and condition before it's moved. The precision is almost surgical. You start to appreciate just how much patience is required to do this work properly. But the real goosebump moment comes near sunset. The archaeologists clear a section large enough that the outlines of several warriors can be seen standing shoulder to shoulder, just as they were placed over 2,000 years ago. Though most are missing heads or arms, their stances are unmistakable, feet planted wide, hands poised to hold weapons. It's as if they're frozen mid-march, waiting for a command that never came. The crowd watching grows quiet. Even the children stop fidgeting. There's something about seeing them like this that feels alive. Like you're intruding on a very long, very patient military roll call. As the sun dips lower, turning everything copper gold, the lead archaeologist calls it for the day. They carefully cover the exposed statues with protective sheeting to keep off the night dew. You linger for a long moment, staring at the one warrior face that's still visible, its stern expression locked on some point beyond you. You wonder if its maker ever imagined that, millennia later, a random farmer would be the one to uncover it. Walking home in the deepening twilight, your mind buzzes with questions. Who built them? How many are there? And why bury an entire army under a field? The stars come out one by one as you reach your door, but you barely notice. You can still feel that warrior's gaze following you into the night. By the next morning, word has spread beyond your village. There are more people gathered at the ropes now, county clerks, curious neighbors, and a few strangers who must have ridden their bikes for miles just to see what's happening. The archaeologists waste no time, peeling back layer after layer of earth until something catches the light. At first, it looks like another chunk of torso, but then one of the team members crouches, wipes the dirt away with the softest brush you've ever seen, and suddenly there it is, a face. Not a broken fragment this time, not a half-buried shard, an entire clay head, staring straight up from the soil. Its expression is calm but stern, with high cheekbones, carefully sculpted brows, and a faintly amused smirk, as if it knows something you don't. The workers fall silent for a moment, as though they've just uncovered a sleeping man. One archaeologist whistles softly and says, "Perfect condition." You feel a shiver climb your spine. It's one thing to see bits and pieces, it's another to see a face staring back at you after 2,000 years. They call for a photographer, who rushes over with a tripod, snapping pictures from every angle before anyone dares to move it. The care they take is almost reverent. Watching them, you realize this isn't just a dig anymore, it's the unveiling of individual people, or at least the closest thing to people you can get out of clay. Mainstream history confirms that some of the first warriors uncovered were remarkably well preserved, their facial features intact, even down to the faint traces of painted color that once gave them lifelike detail. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early archaeologists reported that when the statues were first exposed, many still had vivid pigments, reds, blues, and purples, but within hours of contact with the air, the colors flaked and faded, leaving behind the bare clay we see today. Historians still argue whether better preservation techniques could have saved those original colors, or whether time was simply too unforgiving. The workers dig farther around the head until the neck, shoulders, and finally the entire upper body are revealed. The warrior is standing upright, knees slightly bent, feet buried deep. His hands are positioned as if gripping a missing spear. The sight is haunting, a soldier standing guard for 20 centuries, patiently waiting. The villagers gathered along the rope gasp and murmur. One elderly woman begins muttering a prayer under her breath. You can't look away. The warrior's expression seems to shift as the sunlight moves, turning from stern to almost approving, as though he's silently acknowledging your role in waking him up. By late afternoon, several more heads appear in the same row. Some are beardless youths, others older and grim-looking. Each is unique, and the archaeologists begin sketching and cataloging them. You hear one of them say that no two faces are alike, which boggles your mind. Who would have gone to that much trouble? You head home that night feeling both exhilarated and unsettled. When you close your eyes, all you can see are those faces emerging from the earth, watching you. It's like walking through a crowded marketplace where everyone turns to look as you pass. Sleep comes fitfully, filled with strange dreams, the clay soldiers marching silently through the moonlight, their armor clinking, their footsteps shaking the ground. You wake in a sweat, heart pounding, half expecting to find one of them standing guard at the foot of your bed. And yet, as the first light of dawn seeps through the cracks of your window, you can't wait to get back to the field. Something about those faces has hooked you. You need to see what else is waiting under there. When you arrive at the field the next day, the entire site seems to have transformed overnight. The archaeologists have expanded the dig, pulling back even more layers of soil until what lies before you no longer looks like a single pit, it looks like the edge of a vast chamber. You can now see rows of warriors stretching back farther than you can count, their forms rising from the earth like ghosts waking up after a very long sleep. The effect is both awe-inspiring and eerie. Some figures are still buried to their shoulders, others toppled over like dominoes, their shattered pieces scattered across the floor of the pit. But many stand just as they were placed centuries ago, feet apart, chests out, hands poised to grip weapons. It's like walking into a silent parade ground where time hit pause. The archaeologists are working feverishly now, documenting each new discovery before exposing more. They speak in low, urgent voices, trading measurements and site numbers. You hear one of them estimate that there could be thousands of these figures down here, thousands. You swallow hard. This isn't just a strange burial anymore. This is an entire army. Mainstream history tells us that by the time the excavation of Pit 1 was well underway, archaeologists realized it contained more than 6,000 life-sized warriors arranged in battle formation, along with horses and wooden chariots. Here's a quirky detail: early reports claimed some of the warriors had real bronze weapons, spears, swords, and crossbows, that were still sharp despite being buried for 2 millennia. Historians still argue whether those weapons were ever meant to be used or were purely ceremonial, placed there to arm the emperor's spirit in the afterlife. As the day goes on, the dig reveals more and more of the formation. You can now make out distinct rows, with what appear to be officers standing slightly ahead of the infantry. Some archaeologists crouch over fragments of wooden chariots, carefully brushing away ash-like remnants where the wood has rotted but left its shape in the soil. The villagers crowding the rope are no longer whispering about curses, they're whispering about numbers. How many soldiers could there be? Could this go on for miles? One man suggests that the whole mountain behind the village might be hollow, stuffed with soldiers all the way to its core. Someone else jokes nervously that if they all come marching out at once, there won't be room left in the village to run. The sheer scale of what's being uncovered starts to sink in. You realize that you could spend the rest of your life digging and still not reach the end. The thought is both thrilling and a little terrifying. Near sunset, one of the archaeologists calls everyone over to see something new: the partial remains of a war horse, sculpted with painstaking detail, from its flared nostrils to the knots in its mane. Its clay ears stand straight, as if listening for a command that will never come. For a moment, you swear you can almost hear the echo of hooves and the clang of chariot wheels. By the time the sun dips below the horizon, the pit is bathed in shadows, the standing soldiers now looming silhouettes. The archaeologists cover what they can and post guards again for the night, but you linger until the last possible moment, unable to shake the feeling that the army is watching you go. Walking home under the stars, you think about how much the site has grown in just a few days. What started as a simple well-digging project has turned into something that feels infinite. Tomorrow, they'll dig even deeper, and who knows how much more of this ghostly army will rise from the earth. By the end of the week, the archaeologists' suspicions harden into certainty. This isn't just a random mass burial, it's part of a massive funerary complex. You overhear them talking excitedly about a tomb mound several hundred meters to the west, a tree-covered hill you've walked past 100 times without a second thought. Suddenly it isn't just a hill anymore, it's the resting place of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. One of the lead archaeologists takes a moment to explain it to the villagers, drawing in the dirt with a stick. This entire area, he says, sweeping his arm wide, was built to be an underground kingdom. These warriors were placed here to protect the emperor in the afterlife. You glance toward the distant mound, shivering slightly. The idea that someone would build an entire army, life-sized, armed, standing at attention, just to guard his tomb seems both brilliant and more than a little unhinged. And yet, here's the proof rising out of the ground. Mainstream history confirms that archaeologists soon identified the site as part of Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum complex, a project described in ancient records as being so vast it employed 700,000 laborers. Here's a quirky tidbit: early historical texts claim that the tomb was equipped with palaces and scenic towers, and even an artificial cosmos on the ceiling, sun, moon, and stars made of pearls. Historians still argue whether those details were poetic exaggerations or literal features waiting to be discovered beneath the mound. The more they dig, the more evidence piles up that this wasn't just a grave, it was a statement. The emperor wasn't content with a simple burial, he wanted to take the whole empire with him. You watch as the archaeologists uncover what they think are command posts, slightly raised platforms where the officers would have stood, and storage pits that may have held weapons and armor. The dig now attracts more attention from higher authorities. Representatives from the provincial capital arrive, setting up a small field office right on the edge of your village. They bring with them generators, floodlights, and tents for workers. At night, the field glows under artificial light, casting long shadows of the warriors that dance like ghosts on the canvas walls. It's mesmerizing, and a little spooky. You catch yourself staring until someone taps your shoulder and reminds you it's long past dinner. Life in the village begins to shift around this new reality. Instead of tending melons and wheat, you spend your days ferrying water to the archaeologists, helping them haul away baskets of soil, or simply standing at the rope to watch history being uncovered before your eyes. Some neighbors grumble that their fields are being ruined, but even they can't help peeking through the gaps in the fence whenever a new discovery is made. One evening, as you walk home past the mound, you pause. The air is still, the stars are out, and for a moment you imagine what lies beneath your feet, chambers full of treasures, rivers of mercury rumored to flow around the emperor's tomb, and of course, row after row of silent soldiers standing guard. You whisper a quick apology to them, as though you've just walked uninvited into someone's palace. The next morning, when you return, the archaeologists are already debating where to dig next. Should they move closer to the tomb mound or finish uncovering the current pit? They argue back and forth, some want to map everything systematically, others are eager to see what lies inside the actual burial chamber. You hear one of them say, "Historians still argue whether we should ever open the central tomb at all, it might collapse, or worse, we might lose information we can never get back." As the sun climbs higher, you find yourself staring at the warriors again, their clay eyes focused on the distant mound. For the first time, you feel like you understand what they're guarding. And you wonder, if the emperor could see you now, standing on his parade ground, would he be pleased you found his army, or furious that you disturbed it? You wake the next morning with a single thought buzzing in your head: who exactly was this emperor who buried an army underground? By now, you've heard his name dozens of times, Qin Shi Huang, but knowing his name isn't enough. You want to understand the kind of person who would command thousands of artisans to sculpt clay warriors, chariots, and horses, all to stand guard over him for eternity. As you walk toward the dig site, you find yourself imagining the world as it must have looked 2,200 years ago. This wasn't just farmland then, this was the capital of a brand new empire. Qin Shi Huang, you've heard the archaeologists say, was the first man to unite the warring states of China under one rule. He took the throne as a young king, survived assassination attempts that sound straight out of an action movie, and by the time he was in his late 30s, he had conquered every rival and declared himself first emperor. The more you learn, the more impressive, and a little terrifying, he sounds. Mainstream history tells us that Qin Shi Huang was a visionary who standardized currency, weights, and even writing so that the entire country spoke the same bureaucratic language. He ordered roads and canals that tied the empire together and began building the first version of what would become the Great Wall. And here's a quirky tidbit: the emperor reportedly traveled incognito around his empire wearing plain clothes so he could spy on his officials. Historians still argue whether those tales were meant to make him sound wise and watchful, or just paranoid. But there's a darker side to this story. The emperor was obsessed with control, not just over the land, but over ideas. You overhear an archaeologist explaining that Qin Shi Huang once ordered a mass burning of books that didn't fit his approved version of history. Entire libraries were destroyed so no one could contradict the official record. He also supposedly buried some scholars alive for defying him. Whether that's exaggerated or not, it paints a picture of a man who wanted absolute obedience, even in death. And then there's his obsession with immortality. He sent expeditions in search of magical elixirs that could make him live forever. According to legend, he even sent a fleet of ships eastward to find a mythical island where immortals supposedly dwelled. Some stories claim those ships never returned, though others speculate that maybe, just maybe, they became the ancestors of distant cultures across the sea. Historians still argue whether that voyage even happened, or if it's just a piece of romantic myth-making. You pause by the edge of the excavation, staring down at the rows of clay soldiers. Suddenly they seem less like art and more like a reflection of the emperor himself, regimented, orderly, silent. You imagine him standing on a palace balcony, watching thousands of real soldiers drilling in formation, then turning to his architects and saying, "Yes. Build me this. Forever." One archaeologist nearby explains that the mausoleum complex took nearly 4 decades to complete and involved hundreds of thousands of laborers. You shake your head, trying to picture the noise, the dust, the endless clanging of tools as they dug massive pits, fired clay in huge kilns, and assembled warriors piece by piece. As the day wears on, you find yourself drawn deeper into the emperor's story. The archaeologists share snippets as they work: how Qin Shi Huang survived an infamous assassination attempt where a would-be killer tried to stab him with a dagger hidden in a rolled-up map. How he was so afraid of death that, ironically, he may have poisoned himself by drinking mercury-based potions meant to make him immortal. Walking home that night, you glance back at the mound. It no longer looks like just a hill, it looks like a fortress, a puzzle box holding the mind of a man who tried to live forever. And standing between you and that tomb are the soldiers you've been helping uncover, his clay army, still faithfully keeping watch after all these centuries. You wonder, not for the first time, what kind of person it takes to build such a thing. Visionary? Tyrant? Both? The answer seems to shift with every step you take toward home. The next morning, you arrive at the site just in time to see one of the archaeologists holding a small clay head up to the light. He turns it slowly, smiling, and points out the details to the crowd gathered nearby. "Look closely," he says. "See how the nose is broad, the cheekbones high, the mustache curled. Every single warrior has a unique face." You lean closer, squinting. Sure enough, when you compare this warrior's face to the others already uncovered, you can spot subtle differences. slightly different eyebrows, different expressions, even different ear shapes. It's uncanny, like staring at a crowd of real people frozen in time. Mainstream history tells us that no two terracotta warriors are exactly alike. The craftsmen who made them used molds for basic parts like torsos and legs, but the heads and facial details were sculpted by hand. You picture teams of ancient artisans hunched over clay, carving cheekbones and dimples with the same care a modern sculptor might give to a marble statue. Here's a quirky tidbit: some scholars have suggested that the faces might represent actual soldiers from the Qin army, as if the emperor wanted to immortalize his real troops. Historians still argue whether that's true or if the variety was simply meant to create the illusion of a living army. As you watch the archaeologists work, you begin to notice more than just the faces. Each figure's armor is different too. Some wear heavy breastplates, others lighter tunics, and some have helmets while others go bareheaded. You overhear one expert explaining that these details tell them the warriors were arranged by rank: generals in the front, archers on the flanks, charioteers in their own formations. It's not just art, it's strategy. Nearby, a team uncovers the shattered remains of a wooden chariot. Though the wood has long since decayed, the iron fittings and bronze ornaments still gleam dully in the sun. The wheels lie half buried, perfectly round impressions preserved in the soil. Someone jokes that if you had a strong enough horse, maybe you could hook it up and drive it straight out of the pit. The scale of the project boggles your mind. One archaeologist explains that building the warriors would have required massive kilns, specialized workshops, and an entire logistical network just to transport clay, water, and fuel. You imagine the fields around here not as quiet farmland but as bustling industrial zones full of smoke, shouting overseers, and rows of statues drying in the sun. And then there's the paint. Though most of the warriors now stand in their natural clay color, the archaeologists show you tiny flecks of pigment still clinging to the grooves of their armor. One warrior's belt still has a faint trace of red, another's shoes a hint of black. You try to imagine what the entire pit must have looked like when it was first sealed, an explosion of color, bright enough to rival a royal parade. You head home that evening still turning it all over in your mind. The effort that went into this army seems almost beyond comprehension. Thousands of life-sized figures, all made by hand, all arranged with military precision, all buried underground where no one was ever supposed to see them. Lying awake later, you imagine what it must have been like to be one of those craftsmen. Did they feel pride in their work, knowing they were building something for eternity? Or did they grumble under their breath, exhausted and covered in clay dust, just trying to get through another day? Historians still argue whether the workers were skilled artisans who volunteered for the project or conscripted laborers forced to work under imperial command. Whatever the truth, their work has outlasted them all. And as you drift towards sleep, you picture those artisans' fingerprints still hidden somewhere in the clay, preserved across millennia, silently reaching out from the past. The sun beats down on the dig site, but there's a strange tension in the air today. The archaeologists are working more slowly, whispering to each other, as if the earth itself might be listening. You soon find out why. Someone just mentioned the words booby traps. You lean closer as one of the older experts explains it to a group of wide-eyed students. According to ancient texts, Qin Shi Huang didn't just build himself an underground palace, he built a deadly one. Mainstream historical accounts describe the tomb as being filled with elaborate security measures to keep intruders out, spring-loaded crossbows aimed at anyone who dared to enter, hidden pitfalls, maybe even poisonous gas chambers. You can't help but picture a scene straight out of an adventure movie, with treasure hunters running from darts whizzing through the dark. The most fascinating, and eerie, legend is about the rivers of mercury said to flow through the tomb. The records of the Grand Historian claim that the emperor ordered his engineers to create an entire map of his empire underground, with rivers and seas represented by liquid mercury that glistened like silver in the torchlight. Scientists have actually found unusually high levels of mercury in the soil above the tomb mound, which seems to back up at least part of the story. Here's a quirky tidbit: mercury was thought to be an ingredient in immortality elixirs, which means the emperor may have literally surrounded himself with poison in his quest to live forever. Historians still argue whether the mercury was decorative, symbolic, or even part of some strange ritual chemistry experiment. Standing there, you shiver despite the heat. It suddenly feels as though you're not just digging through dirt but disturbing something sacred, and possibly dangerous. A few workers mutter jokes about leaving the emperor alone before they all get cursed. One even quotes a movie line under his breath, "That's not a tomb, that's a warning." As you wander near the edges of the pit, you notice how carefully the archaeologists measure every inch before digging deeper. They're not just afraid of damaging the artifacts, they're worried about triggering something unexpected. Imagine spending 2,000 years buried and then finally getting visitors. If Qin Shi Huang really did set up lethal traps, maybe he intended them to stay armed forever. But the danger isn't only theoretical. The archaeologists explain that when they first uncovered the warriors in the 1970s, the moment air hit the paint, it flaked off almost instantly, vanishing in seconds. You picture hundreds of brightly painted warriors fading to dull clay before anyone could even photograph them. That's why the tomb itself remains sealed. Technology still isn't advanced enough to excavate it without destroying what's inside. You spend the afternoon listening to hushed debates about what might lie beyond the known pits. Some believe there are secret chambers full of treasures, weapons, and scrolls that could rewrite history. Others argue that opening the tomb might unleash toxins, collapse the delicate structure, or simply ruin the mystery forever. Later, as dusk falls, you find yourself staring at the distant mound that marks the emperor's actual tomb. It looms on the horizon like a sleeping volcano, silent and watchful. For a moment, you imagine what it would be like to descend into that central chamber, your torchlight flickering against golden walls, the air thick with the metallic smell of mercury, the echo of your footsteps, the first sound heard there in 2 millennia. Would you dare to open the emperor's coffin? Or would you feel like you were trespassing in someone's eternal bedroom? The thought makes you smile nervously. After all, you've already seen what his clay army can do. They've stood guard longer than most civilizations have existed. Maybe that was the point all along, to remind anyone who comes too close that the emperor is still in charge, even now. By the time you head home, night has fallen and the stars scatter across the sky. You think about the mercury rivers glowing in torchlight and wonder if they'd shine under the stars the same way. And for the first time, you're not sure if you even want that tomb opened. Some mysteries, you realize, are more magical when they stay locked away. The next morning, the air feels busier somehow, not because of the dig itself, but because of everything happening around it. The once quiet farming village has turned into a hive of activity. Trucks rumble along the dirt roads, government officials stride around with radios clipped to their belts, and curious neighbors stop by to peer over the fences. You walk through the streets and notice that even the local market feels different. Where people once chatted about rain and crop prices, now they talk about warriors, archaeologists, and rumors of buried treasure. Someone jokes that soon they'll be selling Terracotta army souvenirs. Give it a few years, someone probably will. Mainstream history notes that the discovery of the warriors completely transformed the lives of the farmers who lived here. Many had been struggling to get enough water for their fields, which is what led to digging that fateful well in the first place. Now, instead of just growing wheat or sweet potatoes, they're sharing their village with historians, news reporters, and busloads of visitors who want to glimpse the excavation. Here's a quirky tidbit: for a while, some villagers complained that the dig was unlucky because it took farmland out of production. One old man supposedly grumbled that, "These clay soldiers don't feed my family." Others, though, saw an opportunity, selling noodles to visitors, guiding curious travelers to the site, or just basking in the bragging rights of living next to something world-famous. Historians still argue whether the government did enough early on to compensate locals for losing so much farmland, or if the villagers were simply swept aside by the excitement of the discovery. You spend part of the day hanging around the small cluster of tents set up for the archaeologists. It smells like tea, damp canvas, and dust. Someone is always boiling water over a tiny gas burner, and every surface seems to have a layer of field notes, brushes, or maps spread across it. The rhythm of life here has its own charm: quiet mornings of careful digging, noisy afternoons when someone finds something big, peaceful evenings when everyone gathers to talk over what they've learned. The farmers who first made the discovery often drop by, still curious about what their well digging uncovered. You watch them laugh with the scientists, sharing cigarettes and small talk. One of them points toward the mound and tells you he sometimes dreams about soldiers marching out of it at night, their bronze spears glinting under the moon. You're not sure if he's joking, but you definitely glance over your shoulder a little more often after that. Walking back through the village, you notice children playing near the fields, pretending to be archaeologists. They poke sticks into the dirt, pretending to find statues, and then march around shouting orders like little generals. It makes you smile. This discovery isn't just rewriting history books, it's reshaping the imaginations of everyone who lives nearby. But not everything is idyllic. The increased attention means the village feels crowded, almost too loud at times. You hear one farmer mutter that he misses the days when his biggest worry was whether the goats had gotten into the garden. Now he has to deal with journalists asking for interviews and officials asking for paperwork. Still, there's a sense of pride in the air. This isn't just any village anymore, it's a place where history literally broke the surface. And even though the villagers may grumble, you can tell most of them are secretly thrilled to be part of something this big. As night falls, you sit outside with a few locals, sipping warm tea. Fireflies blink over the fields, and for a moment, you imagine you can see the glow of the warriors beneath your feet. The air smells like earth and sweet hay, and you realize that life here has always been tied to the soil, only now, the soil is giving back secrets instead of crops. You lie down to sleep later, listening to the faint hum of generators in the distance. It feels strange, like living halfway between the past and the future. Tomorrow there will be more digging, more discoveries, more visitors. And maybe, just maybe, another story to tell. By now, the news has escaped the boundaries of the village and raced across China, and then the world. When you arrive at the site this morning, it feels almost like stepping into an international fair. You see visitors from every corner of the globe, clutching cameras, sketchpads, and guidebooks. The air hums with conversations in half a dozen languages. Mainstream history records that the Terracotta Army's discovery quickly became a global sensation. Journalists flooded the region, filing breathless reports about the eighth wonder of the world. Television crews filmed the pits, their bright lights making the clay warriors look eerily alive. You overhear an archaeologist chuckling about how they suddenly had to become tour guides as much as scientists. The Chinese government, once cautious about letting outsiders too close, soon realized they had something extraordinary on their hands. Officials began arranging tours for visiting scholars, dignitaries, and even heads of state. Here's a quirky tidbit. One story claims that when a foreign leader first saw the warriors, they asked if they were newly made because they looked too perfect to be ancient. Historians still argue whether this was just polite flattery or genuine disbelief. You watch as a group of schoolchildren from Beijing files past, wide-eyed, pointing at every spear tip and horse hoof. A guide explains in crisp, practiced sentences how each pit represents a different part of the emperor's underground army, infantry in one, cavalry in another, chariot somewhere else entirely. The kids whisper to each other, clearly trying to decide which clay warrior looks the coolest. The site is growing rapidly. Wooden walkways are being built so tourists can view the pit safely from above, and small souvenir stalls have popped up nearby selling paper cutouts and tiny warrior figurines. Someone jokingly hands you a fridge magnet shaped like a general's head, you pocket it, figuring that one day it might be a collector's item. But it's not just tourists who are coming. You spot scientists from overseas universities talking animatedly with the Chinese team, trading theories about the paint chemistry and soil preservation. One pale-faced researcher is holding a portable spectrometer, scanning fragments of pigment like it's a high-tech magic wand. It's clear that this discovery isn't just national, it's now a global research project. As the day goes on, you overhear conversations about how the Terracotta Army might change how people outside China see its history. For decades, many school textbooks abroad skipped over the Qin dynasty, jumping straight from the Great Wall to the Tang dynasty's golden age. Now, thanks to these warriors, the first emperor's story is front-page news everywhere. In the evening, you sit by a small fire with a mix of archaeologists, journalists, and curious locals. Someone passes around a newspaper from Europe with a huge photo of the excavation site on the front page. You can't help but grin. This once quiet patch of Shaanxi soil is suddenly world famous. But with fame comes pressure. The archaeologists talk quietly about the responsibility they now carry. Every mistake, every scratch on a warrior, every mishandled fragment, could be seen by the whole world. Historians still argue whether the decision to open the site so quickly was wise or rushed by the excitement of international attention. As the fire crackles, you glance toward the dark silhouette of the mound in the distance. Somewhere under there lies the unopened tomb of Qin Shi Huang, still untouched, still holding its secrets. And you realize that the entire planet is now waiting, watching, wondering what might be hidden inside. By the time you finally crawl under your blanket, you can still hear distant voices speaking foreign languages, the faint whir of cameras, and the low rumble of buses heading back to the city. The Terracotta Army is no longer just a village curiosity. It's become a bridge between worlds, a place where past and present, and East and West, meet in the most unexpected way. You wake the next morning to the sound of hammers and scaffolding being erected around the dig site. The archaeologists are buzzing with a different kind of energy today, less about discovery, more about protection. The warriors may have been hidden safely for over 2,000 years, but now that they're exposed to air, sunlight, and curious humans, they're in trouble. Mainstream history tells us that preserving the Terracotta Army has been one of the biggest challenges in modern archaeology. The moment those warriors were uncovered in the 1970s, their once vivid paint started to peel and flake. You watch a conservator gently brush a figure with something that looks like clear glue, explaining that they have to stabilize the pigments before they vanish completely. You imagine how frustrating it must have been back then, finding a warrior so colorful it looked freshly painted, only to watch the colors fade to dull gray in minutes. Here's a quirky tidbit: early attempts to preserve the paint involved everything from hairspray to experimental polymers, some of which worked about as well as spraying perfume on a bonfire. Historians still argue whether some of those early treatments caused more harm than good. You step inside one of the protective tents where a small team works under soft light, carefully piecing together broken fragments. It feels like walking into a hospital for clay soldiers, each piece laid out on trays, tagged, and waiting to be reunited with the rest of its body. There's something strangely moving about seeing a warrior's hand, or a horse's ear, sitting alone on a table. The smell of wet clay hangs in the air as restorers mix fresh material to patch cracks. You watch as they use tools the size of dental instruments to smooth repairs until they're almost invisible. One of them grins and says, "It's like plastic surgery, but for someone who's been dead for 2 millennia. Preservation isn't just about the warriors themselves. You overhear conversations about temperature control, humidity, and even bacteria that can grow on ancient clay if the environment isn't perfect. One scientist explains that even a single fingerprint from a visitor could introduce oils that stain the surface forever. Suddenly you're hyper-aware of where your hands are and keep them firmly behind your back. As the day goes on, you notice how methodical everything has become. Every artifact is photographed, catalogued, measured, and stored in climate-controlled rooms when possible. Some newly unearthed figures are even left buried until technology improves enough to guarantee their safe excavation. It's a strange thought, choosing not to dig, even though you know there's history waiting just below the surface. You find yourself thinking about how delicate the balance is. Too much exposure, and the warriors crumble. Too much sealing, and moisture builds up, causing mold. It's a constant dance between revealing the past and protecting it. Walking back toward the village, you see workers putting up new fences and visitor paths to keep tourists from getting too close. It reminds you of a zoo enclosure, except that animals are clay soldiers who haven't moved in 2,000 years. That night, you sit outside under the stars, thinking about how much work goes into simply keeping these warriors standing. It's almost as though the project that began in Qin Shi Huang's time is still ongoing. He commanded an army to guard him forever, and now entire teams of scientists are making sure that command is fulfilled. You wonder aloud whether the emperor would approve of this. Would he be pleased that his army still inspires awe around the world, or annoyed that strangers keep poking around his eternal fortress? Historians still argue whether his tomb was meant to be found at all, or whether we've simply stumbled into a secret we were never meant to see. Either way, the message is clear: the warriors may belong to the past, but they also belong to the future now. And the people here are doing everything they can to make sure that future still has a chance to meet them face to face. By now, you've seen enough warriors to fill a stadium, but the archaeologists keep reminding you that this is just the beginning. There are still entire pits that remain untouched, and the most mysterious part, the emperor's own tomb, has never been opened. Standing at the edge of the site, you feel like you're staring at a locked door with the key hidden somewhere in the future. Mainstream history confirms that the central burial mound, which covers Qin Shi Huang's actual resting place, has never been excavated. You overhear an expert explaining why: the technology to safely open it without damaging what's inside just doesn't exist yet. It's not just a matter of digging a hole, it's about preserving a sealed environment that's been stable for over 2,000 years. Break it too quickly, and you could destroy priceless paintings, documents, or even the entire structure. Here's a quirky tidbit: some researchers use remote sensing equipment to peek inside the mound without digging. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed intriguing patterns: walls, passageways, maybe even chambers, but no one knows for sure what they hold. Historians still argue whether we should open the tomb at all, fearing that rushing in could be disastrous. As you walk around the perimeter, you imagine what might lie hidden under your feet. Perhaps entire rooms filled with jade, gold, and bronze treasures. Perhaps archives of bamboo scrolls that could rewrite everything we know about early Chinese history. Or maybe something even stranger: booby traps still armed, mechanical devices waiting patiently to spring, or rivers of mercury shimmering in the darkness like liquid mirrors. The archaeologists debate heatedly over dinner. One of them insists that waiting is the wisest choice, pointing to past disasters where ancient artifacts crumbled the moment they were exposed. Another argues that we can't wait forever: what if an earthquake or flood damages the tomb before we ever see it? The conversation goes on long into the night, with no one fully agreeing. You sit quietly, listening, feeling oddly protective of the tomb. Part of you wants to see it opened, to know every secret it hides. But another part of you likes the mystery. There's something poetic about the emperor still holding his final secret after all this time, as if he's still one step ahead of everyone else. Later, you take a walk under the moonlight and glance at the mound from a distance. It looks peaceful, almost gentle, but you know what power and ambition are buried inside. It's like standing next to a sleeping dragon, beautiful, but not to be taken lightly. As you head back, you overhear two archaeologists talking quietly about the future of the site. They dream aloud about a day when technology might let them open the tomb without losing a single brushstroke of paint, when the mercury rivers can be studied safely, when the emperor's coffin can be revealed without fear of damage. And yet, they admit, even if that day comes, there's no guarantee we'll be ready for what we find. Lying awake that night, you realize this discovery has changed you. You used to think of history as something static: names, dates, dusty books. But this place is alive. It's still keeping secrets, still forcing scholars to argue, still making you wonder about what's waiting just out of reach. Maybe that's the magic of it. The Terracotta army isn't just a relic, it's a conversation across centuries. And until that final tomb is opened, if it ever is, the conversation goes on. The years roll by, and the site becomes almost unrecognizable from the quiet farm it once was. The pits are now covered by massive protective hangars, and streams of visitors line up every day to see the warriors. Souvenir shops, museums, and guided tours have sprung up where wheat fields once swayed. Yet at the heart of it all, you sometimes spot a quiet old man sitting on a bench near the entrance, one of the very farmers who first struck the head of a warrior with his shovel. You walk over to sit beside him one warm afternoon. He doesn't say much at first, just watches the endless stream of tourists filing in and out. Then, with a faint smile, he begins to talk about that dusty day so many decades ago. He remembers the stubborn ground, the taste of sweat on his lips, the shock when the shovel hit something that rang like stone. He never could have guessed that moment would change not just his life, but the entire world's understanding of China's past. Mainstream accounts often mention that the farmers became minor celebrities, invited to ceremonies and photographed with visiting dignitaries. The old man chuckles about the time he met a foreign president and was asked to autograph guidebooks. Here's a quirky tidbit: he admits that for a while, he got tired of signing his name over and over and just stamped his fingerprint instead. Now those books are prized collector's items. Historians still argue whether enough credit was given to the farmers for their role in the discovery, or if they were overshadowed by the archaeologists who came after. You listen as he talks about how the village changed. At first, he missed the quiet fields, but now he admits he's proud to have been part of something so big. We were just digging for water, he says softly, but we found history instead. His words linger in the air like dust motes caught in sunlight. Before leaving, you glance one last time at the rows of clay soldiers. They stand silent and eternal, as they have since the day they were sealed in the earth. Yet because of a farmer's simple well digging, the world now knows they're here, still guarding, still waiting, still reminding us that the past is never really gone. And now, as you imagine yourself walking slowly away from the pits for the last time, let the world outside your window fall quiet. Picture the rows of warriors standing peacefully in the dim light, their shadows stretching across the floor like watchful sentinels. The noise of the tourists fades, the workday ends, and the dust settles gently back over the earth. Take a slow, deep breath, as though you can smell the ancient clay, cool and still. The Emperor's Mound looms softly on the horizon, not threatening now, just patient. The warriors seem less like soldiers and more like companions, keeping their silent vigil as the stars prick the sky overhead. Let your thoughts drift like mist over the fields, slower and slower, until the figures blur and the excavation tents dim. You are safe here. The ground is steady beneath you, and history will still be waiting tomorrow. The past isn't going anywhere, it's content to rest a little longer, just as you should. So close your eyes, let the last flicker of torchlight fade from the edges of your mind, and sink into the quiet earth right alongside those clay soldiers. Sleep comes gently, like a blanket drawn up to your chin, and the Terracotta army keeps watch as you drift away.